Okay, calculations in Stratum. Here we go. Here's our agenda. We're going to be reviewing, obviously, how to build a calculation within a view within Stratum. We're going to be talking about, obviously some common business calculations without going too crazy. Using other things in your calculations other than just numbers, right? Pickup fields or attributes are available certainly to be calculated against. Time dimensions can be used in your calculations, so we'll talk about that. If you do any calculations, you might have a runaway view. We'll talk a little bit about how you can cancel that. It's pretty simple. There's actually a view monitor for you security administrators out there. We'll visit that very quickly, and then we'll dive into a demo and take any questions. So that's our plan for the next 28 minutes. All right, so calculations, in terms of reviewing the calculation, once you add in a calculated measure, and I'll show you how to do that, you obviously get routed to the expression window to build the calculation, which is what you see now. This is actually some form of a pop-up menu that comes up in the interface, just so you know. And this menu allows you to build this calculation with the components in your view. So on the left side, you'll see, the different folders that basically house the different items within your view. So any hierarchies, measure items that are currently residing within the view will be available as you expand those folders. You should see the hierarchies that you're using within that view, and you should also basically see all the measure items within that view as well. Okay. Obviously, it's not going to show you everything, so it's just going to show you the things that are within that view. And that allows you to select those things and bring that over to the calculation expression window, which is what you see here. What I like about this is that you've got a hyperlink to some examples there that you can very quickly jump to a help document that really outlines some more advanced, basically from basic to advanced calculations that you can copy and paste the syntax in, massage it, and yeah, it's a good guide to reviewing some of the calculations right at your fingertips there. But this is where the magic happens, right? This is your syntax area. You can actually type this in, although I wouldn't recommend it. But picking the measure items and the hierarchies or the attributes from the left-hand side and just dragging and dropping them over is pretty easy to do. Building your calculation. In this case, we actually notice that this is using a percent of change function, which is we'll get into that in a minute. But you can use these different functions that we provided to help you do calculations easier, make them easier, and to help you define them quicker without thinking about math too much. Nevertheless, we always think about math anyway, right? But this makes it easier. So you're thinking about business as opposed to just how do I calculate, or do division without, dividing by zero. It should be the least of your problems. So that's kind of what this resolves for you. Here's formatting. So if you're like defining a percentage, or if this is money that you're dealing with, you'll have different display masks available with the pull down menu here, and you can select it as needed, and it will show up with that display mask on it. So that's convenient. It's right there, very quick and easy. And then over here is your column header. It's a free-form text area where you can type in whatever you want. If you click on the ellipse there on the button, it'll take you to a menu where you can type in, again, custom text or use smart text, where it will pick up the name of the measure, perhaps, or some different things. If you're using time, you can incorporate some time components in here as well. So that is the expression window, and we'll take a look at that in a second in the demo, in terms of how we can use that to build some live calculations. Here we can see some common business calculations here being built. We can see a variance, very simple, take this and the difference between two measures essentially is subtraction. Pretty simple. You use your dash between those measures to basically do that subtraction. Here we're subtracting this year and last year's sales. to get a variance. What's the difference between those two grand totals? It's going to be a money, result. So I'm going to format it as such. And as we can see, we named it variance. Here, we're taking that a step further, and we're getting a percent of change. Now, I could do the math on that, but I chose to use the Stratum function here. So on the left-hand side, so again, on the left-hand side, you can see where I got the measures. I expanded the measure item folder here, and those expose themselves, and I'm able to just use those in my calculation. Pretty simple. If I expand out the Stratum viewer function folder, it'll allow me to pursue some functions that we provided for you. And as you can see, the percent of change function is basically taking the different, or dividing these two together to get that percent of change. So that'll, that function will prevent your divide by zero errors from showing up, which is, kind of a pain in the butt. And certainly makes it easy for you to say, well, I just want the percent of change between these two measures. So, that's how you would build a very simple variance. As you get more advanced, you can do things like adding in attributes to your calculations. So in this case, I could see that I'm using an attribute called product current list price, and that's at the product level. So obviously I would need product in the view to do this. I would also need to bring in that attribute into the view as well, so that I can have that available to me for my expression. So make sure you do that ahead of time, and then that way you can have that available here where you can select it and make that available. Here I'm using the value function just to turn that into a number. That's all we're doing in this case. And then we're putting a money tag on it and calling it list price extended. That's just the list price. If you wanted to extend that, I would imagine you'd multiply that against your units. So that's something that you can do. Here we can see that we've built a calculation for that list price, or that current list price here. We have that extended list price here. But there's a problem here. I mean, we're getting a lot of empty rows here, and well, we don't really want to have that. So how do we clean this up so that when we calculate against an attribute, this doesn't happen? Well, you can do an if statement. So here we've got a logical if statement that we're using, and that's under your numeric functions, and you can double click or select that folder, expand it out. And by selecting that, you'll see in a blank expression area, you'll see the syntax come up. And it's essentially looking for Boolean logic, right? If this condition is met, then do this, otherwise do that, is essentially all this is. So you can do a lot of really cool things with that, right? So I can go in and I can say, well, if this measure is equal to 0, then make that cell null, otherwise the calculation should be done. And we're just going to show that. Basically, we're just showing that list price field, right? That's all we're doing, is exposing it. Here we can see that the syntax, I can just have that at my leisure, or for my review. And I've put in 2 forward slashes there so that doesn't really do anything. It's a comment line, right? It's a notes line for yourself. And you can do multiple of those as long as you have 2 forward slashes to make notes for yourself about this calculation. So that's nice. You can document your calc and make some notes as to why you did certain things within that calculation. We do that, and look what happens. Magic happens, right? We can see that, the view looks, wow, just a lot better, actually. And the list price is available, here. I can certainly put a number or a money sign on that, because obviously that didn't occur. But nevertheless, that's what you would do. Obviously, your row count went down because you're not showing a bunch of empty cells. So in review, what do we do there? Well, if the measure is equal to 0, again, we just made those empty cells null, and the interface itself will ignore a null value. And that was the problem there. And then otherwise just show that pick or that attribute. I keep wanting to call it a pickup field because that's what we called it 20 years ago. Now, it doesn't show you, I'll show you this in the demo, but it doesn't show you the math that you can do against that list price field. I would calculate that against units to get your extended list price, right? And then you can do some discounting. So I'll show you that in a second. If you're using time as a dimension in your view, that's available too. So that's going to be available as a hierarchy, right? Time is treated as it's just another hierarchy, just like product and customer and the other hierarchies that you have within your environment. Here we can see that there's a syntax for an expression over there that's calculating current year and actual sales to give me basically year-to-date sales. So I'm using my based time dimension, year-based, months-based, to build this so that it stays current and will always show me current year sales. This is a technical term for this called a tuple, where you mash together or find the intersection of, in this case, two dimensions, or I'm sorry, a dimension member and the data item that you select or measure. So this is the intersection within the cube of current year and sales, essentially. So that's always going to give you current sales. Next year is going to give you current sales. As you roll into the new year, it comes with you. So this is dynamic, which is good. Obviously, I don't have to come in here and change this. And this is how you would build a current year sales. So if you want to make like certain columns real simple, you don't want users to really screw around with time or whatever, this is a way to do that. And you can just build calculations that will just say year-to-date sales or month-to-date sales for that matter. And you can certainly do last year-to-date sales, but just by using prior year here and making that available as prior year sales. Now remember, when you do this, prior year sales is going to show all of last year. So that would be something to think about when you build views like this or calculations that include these types of time dimensions. But as you can see, this can be done. I can do this with year to date or month to date for that matter, and make those available as well and use time in my calculation. So we've seen how we can use an attribute, and we've also seen how we can use a time dimension within our calculations. Here, taking it a step further, we can even add in additional conditional formatting to make our calculations pop, so that when it's negative, I can see that very clearly. Cautionary or good areas were of growth pop out as green, negative areas show as red, and customers obviously take notice of that and are able to find negative situations very clearly, very easily by using these conditional formats. Stratum actually has some that are predefined that you can use, or you can define your custom ones within the view itself. So that's something that you can actually build into the calculation yourself as a custom conditional format as well. But as you can see, these calculations, tell a story a little bit more effectively here with these conditional formats. I think I can see clearly where areas of concern and areas of growth. So don't forget about those, and those are within the properties of the measure itself. So if you go into the View Explorer and do a properties, right click and select properties on that measure, you'll see down in that properties menu where that conditional format option is available. Here's that menu where you can go in and define that traffic light condition. In this case, we can see that if my sales growth percentage is over 20%, then it's green. If it's between 0 and 20%, then it's yellow. And then otherwise everything is red, which means that's basically anything that's negative. So that's how you would build that particular condition. The point too is because we're actually using a sales percentage, a growth percent, like a variance percent, right? So that's saying 20% essentially. As we all know, percent is a number between 0 and 1. Or if you didn't know that, you learned something today. Runaway views. So you might risk this from time to time as you build these calculations, especially with the attribute, right? If you forget to do the if statement and you build a calculation against an attribute and you're returning millions of rows, don't worry, you can cancel it. So use your cancel button. It'll pop up as the thing begins to grind, and you should be able to go ahead and cancel that. Again, that's just something that you can turn off. The problem here is that if you didn't save it, you may lose some work here, because when you cancel it, it doesn't take you back, right? It just cancels the query and then returns you to essentially a confirmation screen telling you that the processing has been canceled. So keep that in mind. Essentially, basically, the moral of the story is save early and often, right? I know it's an old business cliche. You're probably rolling your eyes right now, but that's something that could really save you some time and frustration. Speaking from experience here. For you administrators out there, there's actually a view monitor. So if you can go in here and see that if there's any views out there that are hung, essentially, you can come in here and cancel them. So this would be in your admin tools, admin utilities, in the hamburger menu for you upgraded folks in the upper right hand corner. And as you can see, it provides some pretty good information about the start date of how long this thing's been running. And as you can see, I can go ahead and select it and cancel it. That's a refresh button, so you can see if it's still running. So that's pretty cool. If you didn't know that existed, that's something that was introduced in viewers Stratum 7.1. That's me, Adam Kurtz. That's my email. That's my phone number. So if you need to contact me about any of this or anything else regarding Stratum, I'm your guy. So don't hesitate. All right, so let's take a look at some of this. We talked a little bit about how to do a calculation, right? Here we can see that I can come into a very simple view and create a calculation. Here, I've already got one built for the variance. How did I do that? Well, I right-clicked and I selected Add a Calculation, which allows me to gain access to that expression window. As we all looked at within the presentation, we saw that I can bring this up and build a new calculation in this case, right? Here we could see that the hierarchies are exposed. I've only got 3 of them: product brand, product line, and sold to. If I expand my measure items, I can see that I've got this year and last year's sales, and that there's that variance column. So yes, you can use your existing calculations and build a calculation off of that, which is something I'm going to do now. I'm going to build a variance calculation, a variance percent calculation off of that simple variance. So I can use that. I could come in here and say variance over last year's sales, boom, and be done with it. But I want to basically fill in some other things like, well, this is a percentage, right? So I might want to include a percentage display mask. Do I want decimals or not? I'll leave that up to you. So there's my display mask. Another new thing, I don't know if this was in the presentation, but as you can see, there's a fill color for that. If you want to fill in the entire column with some coloring, you can do that too. No, it can not be widened. So this is something that can be dragged and dropped, but you cannot expand it, unfortunately. So coming in, building this, obviously, here's my calculation. There's my name of the calculation, which I can then swipe over and just rename it freeform right here, right? So if I want to just call this variance percent, then I can go ahead and just type that in. I'm going to click OK, and it's going to show me my variance percentages. And as we can see, it's pretty flat because it's demo data. So nevertheless, your data will tell a much better story. I'm sure of it. And don't forget, you can drag and drop these. So if I want to put that behind my variance column, I could do that. So these are completely drag and droppable. If I want to put this over here, I can do this with these regular calculated columns. I can put them wherever I want. Okay. So there's my variance percent. If I right click and do a properties on that, the properties menu will come over here on the right hand side. Interestingly enough, you can expand that one, and I can come in here and I can add in my conditional formatting if I wanted to. So there's where that is. If I wanted to make this variance pop a little bit more, although it's going to be hard because all the data is the same. Nevertheless, I'll try. So it looks like 22% is our number there. So anything over 20%, I'm going to try something. So here, once you select your conditional format option, you're going to see all the global ones populate, and you can use these if you want. I personally like to build them. I mean, unfortunately, when you use these, you're at the mercy of the owner and how they built it. So when I select custom, I can actually just pursue my own rule here. And so I can, and again, not expandable, but I could certainly drag and drop it just so I could see the watercolor image behind of my data. And if I wanted to then say, well, this is a variance percent, traffic light, free form again, you can call it what you want, but you try to make it the sense of it, right? You want to be somewhat self-explanatory here. I can write a book here further about how to describe it if I wanted to. I can come down here and start defining it, right? So if I wanted my format to be, the background would be, I don't know, like a reddish color. So it could be like a hard red if I want. The font color will keep as, you might want to make that white. So here we can see that if I make that, hard code that in as a white font, it'll look like that. So it's going to look like that for anything negative, right? Or anything below a certain number, which would be like, in this case, anything under, we'll make this 0.2. Right. Or I can attack this. I probably should attack this a different way, right? I probably should just do the green one first. So let's do that. Boy, that's an ugly green. I'm going to try that one. And then white still works. So we'll do that. And then this will actually be greater than or equal to a 0.24. How's that? Because I see a 0.25 out there. This will be our intermediary cautionary area. So I'm going to make that anything less than or actually greater than or equal to 0. So I'll do that one. And that'll be yellow. So here we got the yellow. And probably I'm going to leave the text black. So that looks pretty good. Icons, what are those? Well, let's throw in some of those, shall we? We can make this thing, look at the interesting, cool things we can do with these, man. We got bars. What? Are you kidding me? Directional. So if I want to do stuff like this, I can do that. Indicators or traffic lights. Let's do that. So here we've got the green one. Boom. See that? And then the yellow. Boom. And then all else, what do you think that's going to be? Yeah, you guessed it, is going to be red. And we want to do our formatting as such. So that pops up red. And we'll make it hard red. And we'll make that font white. So it's going to look like that. Oh, wow. I think we're ready for prime time here. Boom. And there it is. Oh, the red didn't show up. And I can come back in and revisit that. But as you can see, everything else kind of worked pretty good. So, again, you can play around with that. I don't want to, spend too much time with the formatting per se. So that's obviously available, and you can, make the things pop. Obviously, the things, areas of growth are, popping up green, et cetera, et cetera. I can play a little bit more with the thresholds, but that's kind of what, how you would begin to do some of that, right? If we look at a couple more of these, we can see that, using a discount analysis example. So here's an example of that using that attribute field. So, and this will be, I see this, a fair amount where users are using, these attribute fields for calculations. Here we have a current list price for the item. We know sales typically involves a discount. So how can I use that list price field, which essentially that's all that is just the attribute field. If I didn't do anything fancy there, I just added that in. If you right click any dimension, you can add an attribute relationship, so that you can start, using those to, calculate against if you wanted to, if they're populated. As you can see, that one is not. So you can certainly hide or delete, some of those. Um, Nevertheless, when you have the list price populated here, I can then use that in a calculation. So here we can see our extended list price, and I can certainly see how that compares to sales. And, there is definitely some discounting going on here. We can see clearly that the list price is greater than the actual sale price. So how would we calculate something similar where I can then calculate against this attribute field and then make that list price, number available to my users so they can do something similar? Let's take a look at this calculation. I'm just going to double click on it, and it's going to show me the calculation. It's similar to the presentation that we saw, except it's taking, like I said, it's going to calculate, multiply against our units, so that we can then extend out that unit price or that list price for that item and extend it out based on how many units we sold. So here I'm using that val function to make that pickup field or that attribute a number, so that it jives with another number and it continues to be a number, right? So that's important. So that val function, that's all that is you'll type in val, open paren, and then, type in or select your measure, and it will fill that in and then close out your paren. I just made that a number, right? I just did that. Now, for obviously, you're going to do that against you don't have to do that against the measure. You'll do that against your attribute relationship. So here we can see that if I wanted to make my list price a number, there it is, right? So that's a number that I can calculate against anything, another number, which we know that these measure items are numbers, right? And that's what we're doing up top here. First of all, we're converting that attribute to a number, so that that list price becomes a number that we can calculate against our year to date or our month to date sales, whatever time frame you have in there, right? And that's that, and I can validate that. It likes the validation. It's good. I click OK, and now I've got a list price that's calculating my units times that list price of 47, right? If we do the math real quick on that, we can check it, by 47 times, what do we have there? 3059. Of course, if I click the wrong button, it's not going to work, is it? And we come up with 143,773, probably with some rounding. So we're in the ballpark there, right? So yeah, I mean, you have that capability where you can extend out your list price and then calculate a variance. Then over here on our far right, we're actually doing a variance between that list price and the actual sales that will give us our discount amount, right? So use these calculations to, well, obviously to calculate against measures. You can use these regular calculations to calculate, average selling price, variances, variance percentages, but you can also use other components in your view. In this case, our attribute or our hierarchies for that matter, time. I know that we didn't look at much in terms of time, but you can use time in your calculations as well, and incorporate those time dimensions in. Here I've got a year to date or this year's sales column. So if I look at that, I can see that I've got current year and sales amount together in a tuple here. And that's all that is. It's real simple. And that gives you this year's sales. And this will always be this year's sales because that's going to be dynamic. So yeah, I mean, use the different components in your view to your advantage. And certainly pretty much you can calculate against anything, I mean, at the end of the day. And if you go to your Stratum functions, you can see that you can use these divide with zero check if you're doing simple division, percent of change, use these to get you going quickly so that you can, define these calculations quick, make things easier on you, and avoid the divide by zero error.